Let me tell you about a language that should have been dead for 2,000 years. Most languages follow a predictable arc. They rise with a civilization, reach a peak of cultural influence, and then fade, slowly replaced by other languages, fragmenting into dialects, eventually surviving only in academic institutions and ancient texts that fewer and fewer people can read. Latin followed this arc, Sanskrit followed it, Sumerian followed it. The great languages of the ancient world became the property of specialists, extracted from ordinary human life and placed behind the glass of museums and university classrooms. Greek did not follow this arc. Greek is still spoken today, not just as a historical curiosity, but as the living first language of approximately 13 million people. It has the longest documented history of any living European language, stretching from Mycenaean inscriptions scratched into clay tablets around 1400 BC all the way to conversations happening in Athens right now, in 2026, over coffee and cigarettes. 3,400 years of continuous documented use. No other living European language comes close. But the reason I want to talk to you about Greek today is not its longevity as a spoken language. It is something stranger and more consequential than that. It is the fact that a specific form of Greek, the form spoken in Alexandria and across the Eastern Mediterranean world in the 3 centuries before Christ and the 1st century after him, became the vehicle through which the 2 most influential intellectual traditions in Western history were transmitted, combined, and eventually transformed into something that neither of them would have become on their own. Those 2 traditions are Greek philosophy and Jewish religious thought, and the language that brought them together, forced them into conversation, and shaped the form in which they have been transmitted to every generation since is what scholars call Koine Greek, the common Greek dialect of the Hellenistic world, the lingua franca of the Mediterranean basin, the language of commerce and philosophy, and eventually of the New Testament itself. To understand why that matters, you have to understand what Greek philosophy actually was, not the watered-down version that shows up in introductory textbooks, but the full, radical, world-altering project that Greek thinkers began in the 6th century before Christ, and that has never really stopped. Most people, when they think of Greek philosophy, think of Socrates asking annoying questions, Plato writing dialogues, Aristotle classifying everything. And that is not wrong. Those things happened, and they matter. But it misses what was genuinely revolutionary about what the Greeks were doing. Before Greek philosophy, human beings explained the world through mythology. Not stupidly. Mythology is not stupidity. It is a sophisticated way of encoding accumulated wisdom, cultural memory, and moral instruction in narrative form. But mythology explains the world through the agency of personal beings, gods who have desires, rivalries, preferences, and moods, who intervene in human affairs for reasons that are ultimately personal rather than systematic. What the pre-Socratic Greek philosophers did, starting with Thales of Miletus around 600 BC, was ask a different kind of question. Not, who made this happen, but what is this made of? Not, which god controls the sea, but what is the fundamental substance underlying all of physical reality? Not, why did the gods allow this drought, but what are the rational principles that govern natural phenomena? This was not atheism. Most of these thinkers believed in some form of divine principle or ultimate reality, but they believed that reality was, at its deepest level, rational, that it operated according to principles that the human mind could discover and articulate if it asked the right questions and reasoned carefully enough. The universe was not arbitrary. It was ordered, and the order was accessible to reason. This idea, that reality is fundamentally rational and that the human mind can access that rationality through careful thought, is the single most important idea in Western intellectual history. Everything that follows from it, over the next 2,500 years, is a development or a challenge to that basic proposition. Plato took it in one direction. Reality, he argued, has 2 levels. The physical world we experience through our senses is a shadow, an imperfect copy of a deeper level of reality consisting of perfect, eternal, immaterial forms, the form of beauty, the form of justice, the form of the good. Philosophy is the process of turning the mind away from the shadows and toward the forms themselves. Aristotle took it in another direction. The forms do not exist separately from physical things. They are present in things, as the organizing principles that make a thing what it is. Reality is knowable through careful observation and systematic classification. Logic is the tool that allows the mind to move from particular observations to universal truths. The Stoics, who came after Alexander the Great had spread Greek culture across the entire known world, took it in yet another direction. The universe is pervaded by a rational divine principle they called the logos, reason itself, the organizing intelligence that holds all things together. Human beings, because they possess rational minds, participate in the logos. Ethics is the process of living in accordance with the rational order of things. That word, logos, is going to become extremely important in a few moments. Hold on to it. Now, while all of this Greek philosophical development was happening in Athens and Alexandria, and across the Hellenistic world, something completely different was happening in a small, politically insignificant strip of land on the eastern edge of the Mediterranean. The Jewish people had their own intellectual tradition, one built not on the question, what is the fundamental nature of reality, but on the question, who is God, and what does he want from us? Jewish thought was not primarily philosophical in the Greek sense. It was primarily covenantal, built around the relationship between a personal God and a specific people, expressed through law, prophecy, narrative, and worship. The Hebrew Scriptures are not a philosophical text. They are a collection of poetry, law, history, prophecy, and wisdom literature that assumes throughout that the most important fact about reality is not its rational structure, but its personal creator, a God who speaks, acts, commands, grieves, rejoices, and enters into relationships with human beings. These two traditions, Greek rational philosophy and Hebrew covenantal religion, would seem to have very little in common. And for most of their parallel histories, they did not interact significantly. And then Alexander the Great conquered most of the known world between 334 and 323 BC, and Greek culture, including the Greek language, became the dominant cultural force across the entire eastern Mediterranean, from Egypt to Persia to the edge of India. Jewish communities found themselves living inside a thoroughly Hellenized world, speaking Greek in their daily commerce and education, encountering Greek ideas in the marketplace and the gymnasium and the philosophical schools. In Alexandria, Egypt, the intellectual capital of the Hellenistic world, a large Jewish community found themselves facing a practical problem. Many of them no longer read Hebrew fluently. The scriptures they considered sacred were inaccessible to them in their original language. And so, in the 3rd century BC, a translation project began that would change the course of Western history. 72 Jewish scholars, tradition says 72 elders, 6 from each tribe, were commissioned to translate the Hebrew scriptures into Greek. The result, called the Septuagint after the Latin word for 70, was the first major translation of sacred texts in human history. And the act of translating the Hebrew scriptures into Greek was not a neutral, technical procedure. It was a philosophical event. Because when Jewish translators sat down with Hebrew words that expressed distinctly Hebrew concepts and tried to find Greek equivalents, they were forced into a series of decisions that brought the two traditions into direct contact. Sometimes the fit was natural, sometimes it was awkward, and sometimes, in the process of trying to find a Greek word that could carry a Hebrew concept, something new was created that belonged fully to neither tradition but drew from both. Now I want to talk about that word, logos. In ordinary Greek, logos meant word. It also meant reason. It also meant the rational principle underlying a discourse or an argument. It also meant the organizing logic of a thing, the reason why something is what it is rather than something else. The range of meaning inside logos made it one of the most philosophically loaded words in the Greek language. The Stoics, as I mentioned, used logos to describe the divine rational principle pervading the universe, not a personal God in the Jewish or traditional Greek sense, but something closer to what a later generation might call the rational structure of reality itself, the principle that makes the universe ordered rather than chaotic. The Jewish philosopher Philo of Alexandria, working in the 1st century BC, tried to synthesize Jewish religious thought with Platonic philosophy, using logos as the central connecting concept. For Philo, the logos was the intermediary between the absolutely transcendent God of Jewish monotheism, who was so far beyond human comprehension that direct contact was impossible, and the created world. The Logos was, in some sense, both the divine mind and its expression in creation. Philo drew on Platonic ideas about intermediary realities to construct this bridge, and in doing so created a philosophical framework that neither pure Jewish tradition nor pure Greek philosophy would have produced independently. And then, sometime around the end of the 1st century AD, a Jewish writer working in the Koine Greek of the Eastern Mediterranean opened a document with words that have been echoing ever since. In the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. The opening of the Gospel of John takes one of the most philosophically loaded words in the Greek intellectual tradition, a word that had been used by Stoics to describe the divine rational principle of the universe, that had been used by Plato's followers to describe the divine mind, that had been used by Philo to bridge Jewish monotheism and Greek philosophy, and identifies it directly with the God of the Hebrew Scriptures. And then, 3 verses later, says the Logos became flesh and dwelt among us. This is not an accident of vocabulary. The author of John's Gospel, almost certainly writing for an audience that included Greek-speaking Gentiles as well as Jewish readers, chose Logos with full awareness of what it would mean to those different audiences. To Greek philosophical readers, it said, "The rational principle you have been trying to describe, the Logos that structures reality and that the Stoics said pervaded all things, that is not an abstract principle. It is a person." To Jewish readers, it said, "The creative divine word through which God spoke everything into existence in Genesis. That word is not just a metaphor. It became human." In one sentence, the Gospel of John brought 2,000 years of Greek philosophical development and 1,500 years of Jewish theological reflection into a single point of convergence. The Greek language did not just provide a vehicle for the transmission of the New Testament. It shaped the categories through which the central questions of Christian theology were formulated, debated, and eventually settled, or at least argued into a form of working definition that could be sustained across centuries. The question of who Jesus was, human, divine, or some combination, was debated across the first 4 centuries of Christianity using vocabulary and conceptual frameworks drawn directly from Greek philosophy. The Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, which produced the Nicene Creed that most Christian traditions still affirm today, used the Greek philosophical term homoousios, meaning of the same substance, to define the relationship between the Father and the Son. That word, and the specific philosophical weight it carried, was borrowed directly from Greek metaphysical discourse. The debates about the Trinity, how one God could be 3 persons, drew on Greek philosophical concepts of substance, essence, and personhood that had been developed by Aristotle and elaborated by the Stoics. The debates about the incarnation, how a divine being could become fully human without ceasing to be divine, drew on Platonic frameworks about the relationship between the eternal and the temporal, the perfect and the imperfect. This has led some critics to argue that what emerged from these councils was not authentic Christianity, but Greek philosophy wearing Christian clothing. That the original Jewish and Aramaic-speaking followers of Jesus would not have recognized the metaphysical formulations produced by councils of Greek-speaking bishops several centuries after the fact. There is something worth taking seriously in this critique. The categories used to formulate classical Christian theology are genuinely Greek categories. The questions being asked about the nature of God and the person of Christ are being asked in a Greek philosophical framework that the first disciples, Galilean fishermen and tax collectors, almost certainly did not share. But here is the counter-argument that I find equally compelling. Every generation of thinkers works with the intellectual tools available to their time and place. The Greek philosophers who developed the conceptual vocabulary used in these theological debates were themselves trying to answer fundamental questions about the nature of reality, the relationship between the finite and the infinite, the relationship between reason and existence. Those questions are not culturally specific in the way that particular religious practices are culturally specific. They are the questions that human beings in every culture eventually find themselves asking when they push their thinking far enough. The Greek language and philosophical tradition gave early Christian thinkers a set of refined, tested conceptual tools for thinking about those questions, tools that had been developed over 500 years of rigorous intellectual labor. Using those tools was not a betrayal of the message. It was the natural result of a universal message encountering the most sophisticated intellectual tradition available for thinking about universal questions. The influence of Greek on Western thought extends far beyond theology, and understanding it changes how you see the history of ideas in a way that is difficult to fully articulate until you actually trace the connections. The words that structure Western philosophy and science are overwhelmingly Greek in origin. Philosophy itself, philos sophos, love of wisdom. Logic, logos again, the principle of rational discourse. Ethics, ethos, character. Politics, polis, the city. Democracy, demos kratos, the people's power. Psychology, psyche logos, the account of the soul. Biology, bios logos, the account of life. Theology, theos logos, the account of God. This is not just a matter of vocabulary. These words carry with them the conceptual frameworks developed by the thinkers who first used them systematically. When Western scientists say they are pursuing the logos of a thing, its rational principle, its underlying order, they are inheriting, whether they know it or not, an assumption developed by Greek philosophers 2,500 years ago, that reality is rational, that it has a logos, and that the human mind can access that logos through careful observation and reasoning. The entire scientific enterprise, its assumption that the universe operates according to discoverable laws, that those laws are mathematical in structure, that human reason is capable of reading the rational order of nature, rests on foundations that Greek thinkers laid before Christianity existed, that Christian theology subsequently integrated, and that the scientific revolution of the 16th and 17th centuries then turned into the most powerful method of knowledge production in human history. The irony that most people miss is this. The scientific revolution, which is often framed as a story of rational inquiry overthrowing religious authority, was built on a philosophical foundation that assumed the rationality of the universe, an assumption that Greek philosophy developed, that Jewish theology reinforced by insisting that a rational God had created an ordered world, and that Christian theology transmitted into the intellectual framework of European civilization. Descartes, Newton, Galileo, these thinkers were not stepping outside a Greek and theological inheritance. They were standing on its shoulders and looking further than their predecessors had been able to see. Let me bring this home. We have covered a lot of ground. From Thales asking what the universe is made of, to Plato's forms, to the Stoic logos, to Jewish scholars in Alexandria translating the Hebrew scriptures into Greek and creating something that belonged to both traditions and neither, to the Gospel of John opening with a sentence that brought 2,000 years of philosophical development into direct contact with 2,000 years of theological development, to the councils that used Greek philosophical vocabulary to formulate the central claims of Christian theology, to the scientists who inherited an assumption about the rationality of the universe without always knowing where that assumption came from. Here is what I want you to take from all of it. Ideas are not generated in isolation. The most significant ideas in human history, the ones that actually changed how large numbers of people understood reality, organized their societies, conducted their science, practiced their religion, emerged from collisions. From the moment when two traditions, two vocabularies, two ways of asking questions about the world found themselves in the same city, the same marketplace, the same library, and were forced into conversation with each other. Greek philosophy and Hebrew theology were not obviously compatible. They asked different questions, used different methods, reached different conclusions. The Greek philosophers who thought most carefully about the universe concluded that its fundamental nature was rational, ordered, and accessible to reason. The Hebrew prophets who thought most carefully about God concluded that his fundamental nature was personal, relational, and accessible through revelation. These are not the same answer to the same question. But when they were forced into contact, when Jewish scholars needed Greek words to express Hebrew concepts, when Greek-speaking Gentiles encountered Jewish scriptures in translation, when the author of John's Gospel sat down to explain who Jesus was to an audience that included both, something emerged from that contact that neither tradition could have produced alone. The logos that is both rational principle and personal creator. The God who is both utterly transcendent and genuinely present. The universe that is both ordered by reason and loved by its maker. That synthesis, imperfect, contested, never fully resolved, still being argued about in universities and seminaries and philosophy departments around the world, is one of the foundations of Western civilization. And it happened because one language, at one particular moment in history, was flexible and rich and philosophically loaded enough to carry both traditions simultaneously. That is what Greek did. That is what language at its best can do. That is what happens when two ways of understanding the world are honest enough with each other to actually listen. I will see you in the next one.